Excuse me just a moment.
That's Frankie, you want to drink or something?
No, I just wish this whole thing would go away. It doesn't go away.
Most certainly the people who have this information, for the most part, would love to share it with their loved ones, to share it with their grandchildren, to share it with humanity in general.
We're not paid a penny for anything.
I'm hoping that they will someday release the information.
It's information of such great consequence that it's something that should be shared by all humanity. It's not something that should be limited to a privileged few within the United States government.
The only reason we're doing this is to try and get as much of the truth out as we can while some of us are still alive.
Well, now, Doctor, could they be hallucinations or some other misrepresented objects?
They could, but I am firmly convinced that such an explanation is not valid for all of them. It might be in few cases, but there is still remaining a solid block of very reliable, good observations which cannot be explained by such means.
I think we are entitled to know what's happening in this world. We live in it. It's our world.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947.
It's getting to be a long-lost story. It's not going to be too long before there's not going to be anybody left that was alive in 1947.
The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
They just think that you're nuts if you talk about it, so... And I don't just generally talk about it, to anybody unless somebody calls and asks me to tell them what happened. It's not a source of conversation over coffee.
If I didn't think the government was withholding information on the overall situation, I wouldn't be sitting here being interviewed, for one thing.
It doesn't get any easier, because every time that I tell somebody about it, I feel like I'm 12 years old again.
They might regularly land outside on oceans or in uninhabited parts of countries, but they might also not be ready to tell us.
He said, I mean the rest of your life. We will find you.
Tell us what actually happened.
Well, finally got back home.
Well, how was your trip to Roswell, Mr.
Rough. Oh, man, tiring. I'm happy to be back home, I guarantee you.
Yeah.
It's quite an ordeal. Spent all day looking for that ranch where we found the stuff.
Uh-huh.
We finally located it, but it's too late to take pictures, so we had to drive all the way back into Roswell. I tell you, I enjoyed going out there, but it's too hard on me. I'm getting too old for that kind of stuff.
Well, you keep saying that, but...
Yeah, but I got to the point where I couldn't even walk. I mean, it's tiring. We had trouble finding the place to begin with. Yeah. We searched the whole day for the place. But when I saw the place, I recognized it.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
So, the house where Mr. Brazil used to live, they renovated the whole thing. It's a boat, a boat who lives there. Mm-hmm. And he took over the ranch, you see. And he was very helpful. In fact, he took us right to the spot, and he knew exactly where it was. Uh-huh. So we were lucky in that respect.
Yeah.
And I walked over that entire area.
Too much happening at one time.
Uh-huh. But I did recognize the exact spot.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Oh, yeah. I took him to the exact spot where that stuff was found.
But there wasn't any debris out there, I guess.
Oh, no. Lord, that thing is vacuum cleaned. Uh-huh. There's nothing left. Roswell right now is composed mostly of retirees. Mm-hmm. It's a beautiful sight, the illumination around that place. Mm-hmm. But I really enjoyed that. So my trip was worthwhile anyway.
Well, I'm glad of that. I'm very happy with it.
What, son?
That makes me feel better, too.
I tell you what, I'd love to live there again.
Well, I would, too, And
I spent quite a bit of time with Walter Haut. I went to his art store, and we had dinner together Wednesday night, rather. So everything went okay.
Well,
I had a big time.
It sure sounds like it. I'm very, very happy for you. It makes me feel better, you know. Takes me down out of my woman.
Well, I'm telling you. Well, son, I'm going to let you go now.
Okay, Danny. Well, look, I'll give you all a call next week.
Okay, fine. Keep your chin up and have as much fun as you can.
Okay.
That's all I think to do.
I'm trying to do it.
Okay, bro.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I think there were 15,000 people living in Roswell, and 7,000 of them were out at the base. It was a huge benefit to the community.
Now, Roswell was probably one of the most patriotic towns in the whole United States. They saved every tin can around. We scraped the tinfoil off of gum wrappers. We saved the string. We turned everything in for the war effort. And even 2 years afterwards, we were still doing it.
The sequence of events, as I've been able to establish them in my mind, is you've got radar sightings taking place early in July, 1st, 2nd, 3rd of July. You've got people watching this thing with great interest. I mean, here we are over the site where the atomic bomb was detonated in 1945. Atomic research still continues, the 509th Bomb Group, and rockets being launched from Alamogordo. So it's an area of high interest, especially to a space-traveling race. Friday, July 4th. The object disappears from the scopes. There's reason to suspect it's down. The next morning, we've got an archaeology team out there. We also have a man and a woman. This story now begins like every science fiction movie you've ever seen. I've got a couple out in the desert. She's married, he's not. They're not supposed to be there. The thing roars overhead and slams into the ground. They look at it the night before, but they're so drunk, they don't do anything about it. The next morning, they sneak back to see what's going on. About the time the archaeology team shows up, the archaeologists send someone back to call the sheriff. Sheriff alerts the 509th Bomb Group. We've got trucks coming in on the morning of July 5th, a military cordon going up around the area here close to Roswell. And this is what's critical. Why do you put up guards on the roads right off Highway 285 just north of town if all you've got is the debris field some 75 miles northwest? You don't need to do that. If the craft impacts much closer to Roswell, then the guards make perfect sense. You want to keep people out of the area. The team picks up the bodies at that location. They're brought back to Hangar 84. The debris is brought back to this area. It's transported out on the night of July 5th. The next day, they're sitting around congratulating themselves. Aren't we bright? We got this thing contained. Nobody knows what's happened. Mac Brazel shows up at the sheriff's office with a box full of the debris. Clearly, this is something else.
So when Kevin came to you, did you then come to your family after that?
Not for about 2 years. Not for about 2 years. First 2 years that Kevin called me, I wouldn't talk to him. And then finally he told me, he said, we've been to a meeting and we know the firemen were out there. We know that your dad was on the crew that went out there. We think you must know something. Will you come and talk to us? So I agreed to come and talk to him, and they were staying here at the Roswell Inn then. I was making a trip to Portales to see my daughter, and stopped to see them on my way back. And we had a conversation about, yes, that I knew that there had been a craft that had crashed, but we didn't go into details on it. And Kevin was talking about the Corona site. And after our conversation, I told him we're not talking about the same thing. Apparently, what you have heard, it does not match what I know about, because the location is wrong. I said, the place where Daddy went, he did not go to Corona, and he would not have gone to Corona. The Roswell Fire Department would not have gone to Corona. So at that point, they started looking for clues to this other crash site. When I told him where Daddy said it was. So that's how this started. That's how it all came out, anyway. My name is Frankie Rowe, R-O-W-E.
Thank you. I know you've probably told this story a million times, but if you could tell it as fresh as possible for our audience, that would be great. Just tell me what happened when your dad came home that day.
The very first time that I heard about this at all. Okay. Daddy came home from work. They worked shifts of a type that they would be on duty maybe 24 hours or 36 hours and then off 8 or 12, like that. So we hadn't seen him for a time. And he got home that evening and he came in so excited. And I was in the kitchen with Mother. And he asked Mother, he said, I've got something I want to tell everybody. Get everybody in here. And she said, we're cooking supper right now. And he said, well, how long is it going to be? Because I've got to talk to everybody. And it was just my mother and myself and the 3 younger kids at home, and my other sister was working. So we hurried and we got it on the table and called the kids in. And he started telling us that they had gone on a call of what they thought was going to be a plane crash north of Roswell. And he said they got called out to Blackwater Draw. And when they got out there, what they saw was not a plane that was our plane, but he said it was a flying craft from somewhere else. Well, we didn't ask questions, but Mother asked all the questions, and we were just listening, and she started, what do you mean somewhere else? And he said, it's not an airplane. He said, it's not from this world.
Now here on this map are pinpointed locations where some 30 saucers have been sighted and are still unexplained. The following proposition could be established. There actually have been and may now be present in the Earth's atmosphere strange aerial objects. Some are of a geometric order. Others can only be described as brilliant light sources. Their form cannot be determined.
He said the crash was like the flying saucers that they have talked about, because there have been a few comments on the news about flying saucers. And he said it was one of the flying saucers crashed. And I don't think really Mother believed him at first. And he said, no, I mean it. We went out there early today, which I don't know what time that was, but early to him could have meant they left before dark. And he said when they got there, they could see that there were 2 bodies that were laying on the ground outside of this craft, and that there was one, what he called little person. And he said there's one little person that was walking around, and he said they were still alive. So she asked him, you know, what did they look like? Did they look like us? And he said they were very small, about the size of a small 10-year-old child. But the head looked like the little insect that we played with or that we saw around our house called Child of the Earth. We all knew what that looked like, so nobody asked any questions on that. We assumed that meant that the head was too large for the body, and it had no hair, and it would have large eyes. We knew that because that's what the Child of the Earth insect looks like. He said they looked quite a bit like us. He said they were a lot smaller than we are. Because when he said a small 10-year-old child, I knew he meant smaller than I was. And I wasn't very big at 12 years old. I was a little small for my age. And he said that the other two were dead and that this one that was alive was very sad. But he emphasized and he kept saying, there's no need for us to be afraid. They're not here to hurt us. And he said, we couldn't help them. And he was more upset over the fact that they couldn't help this little person. And that's something he really felt badly, that he couldn't help this one that was alive. He said you could feel the hurt from this little person that was so saddened by the death of the others with him. And apparently they hadn't been there but just a few minutes, and he said the military came up and they made them leave. And so they went back to the fire station, and he said there had not been a grass fire, which would have been their purpose for going. And they thought there could have been if it had been a normal plane crash. I don't think Mother really wanted to believe it at first. And he talked about how could we be so smug to think that we were the only ones that God could create. If he could create this earth, he could create a lot of others too. So that was just a conversation over dinner that night. And then there wasn't too much said about it for the next couple of days. Then I was at the fire station one afternoon because I'd gotten sick. I had to see the doctor, and we only had one vehicle. So I went back to work with Daddy. He came home at noon and picked me up on his lunch. And I had gone to the doctor and was sitting in the kitchen part of the fire station, and I was eating a glass of ice chips. And a state policeman came in, and he yelled at Daddy. He said, "Hey, Dan, come over here." And he said, "Get all the guys. I want to show you guys something." The state policeman reached into his pocket, and he said, "I don't think you guys got to see anything like this the other day." And he pulled his hand out of his pocket, and it was closed up. He opened his hand over the table and dropped a piece of material that, when it hit the table, it was all wadded up when it left his hand, and when it hit the table, it spread out like it was water. And they were asking him, how'd you get by with this? And he said, well, he had helped with some of the pickup of debris, and he had managed to sneak that one piece in his pocket. He said, I don't know how long I'll get to keep this before I get caught. Because he said, everybody they catch, they're taking away whatever they've got.
Last count, I had spoken to around 4 dozen people who handled various aspects of the debris. The most dramatic is the foil-like material that you could wad up in a ball and let it go and it would unfold itself. A lot of people reported that. What kind of material did we have in 1947 that had those properties? There were things like foil backed with cloth that when you wadded up, it would tend to unfold itself somewhat, but there were always the signs of creases. And some of the people were very specific. There was no sign of a crease or a fold in this thing when it was let down.
After a while, they tried to burn it. Almost all of them carried the old-fashioned lighters. They tried to burn it, and they couldn't burn it. It wouldn't catch on fire, and they took out their pocket knives, and they tried to cut it, and they couldn't cut it. So they got into a discussion as to how bad a force it must have been to tear this piece of material. And they talked about, whether it came from the inside of the ship or the outside or what, and of course nobody knew where it came from. And while they were talking, I guess they all had their chance to play with it for a while, and it was laying on the table, so I reached over and picked it up. And I played for it probably about 5 minutes. And I tried everything they had done with the wadding it up. When you would wad it up in your hand, you couldn't feel it in your hand. You couldn't feel you had anything there. And it would go to a size that was so small that you'd have to look to see if it was still in your hand. And then when you drop it, it spread out all over the table. It made no noise, no sound of any kind. It was just like, it was nothing. It was like you were mashing air together.
So it wasn't aluminum foil?
Oh, absolutely not. No, we had scraped aluminum foil off of everything for the war effort. No, I knew aluminum foil. No, this definitely wasn't. I didn't realize the significance of it at the time. No, I just knew it was different than anything I'd ever seen before. So I forgot all about it after that.
Something came down during the first week of July 1947 on what's known as the Foster Ranch. A man named Mac Brazel was the foreman of that ranch, and he was out checking his sheep. He found all this strange debris. He brought it by his neighbors the next day. They suggested he go into the sheriff with it. He went into Roswell, which was a big journey. This was about 70 miles northwest of Roswell. The sheriff, George Wilcox, called the local air base, Roswell Army Airfield. 2 officers were dispatched, Jesse Marcel Sr. and Sheraton Cabot, the CIC officer.
Mac Brazel shows him the debris field. Clearly it's just metallic debris. Question I posed to a number of people, why didn't they react differently? And the answer's always been, because they knew there was only one. They knew there was a single craft. They knew there was a single crash. They had it all contained. They took a calculated risk. Mac Brazel found some of the same stuff, but they knew it wasn't a craft itself. They knew it was just debris.
They loaded pieces of debris into the Jeep. By the time he got back to the vicinity of the airbase, it was close to midnight. He stopped by his house to show his wife and 11-year-old son, Jesse Jr., this unusual debris.
Well, Jesse Jr. now is an MD. He's a colonel in the Montana Air National Guard. He's a helicopter pilot. I understand he flew choppers in Vietnam. Very stable individual. The type of person that is seeking no notoriety, has no axe to grind on this. I think to a great extent he participates in these things to see if he can help get the truth out. I think this is what a bulk of us are doing. We're not, we have nothing to gain by doing this.
My father was on the intelligence team at the Roswell Army Airfield, and it was his job to look at what they thought was a crashed aircraft or crashed something out there out of Roswell. When he came in, he was very excited. He woke my mother and myself up at must have been 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and he wanted us to see what he was bringing in from the field. And he said, this is parts of a flying saucer, and it was all brought in and spread out on the kitchen floor, and we just looked at it. You know, I picked up this particular I-beam and held it up to my upper left to look at it with the kitchen light reflecting on the inner surface, and that's when I saw the writing or the symbols of some sort. I thought at first, this is hieroglyphics or some kind of writing like that. It certainly looked alien to me.
Hey, I won't see it down here. You'll have to hold it up.
Okay, well, yeah, just tell me what to do, because I don't know how much of me you've got in the picture or anything. This was developed with the help of Jesse Marcel Jr. and Kent Jeffrey. This is a replica of what was picked up off of the desert by Major Jesse Marcel back in 1947.
The one I saw was probably greatest 3/8 of an inch in cross-sectional diameter, 12 to 18 inches long. Actually, the material that I saw almost resembled something that could have been blown out through the side of the craft, like there was an in-flight explosion just spreading debris or blowing debris out of the side. There was a debris field It's 3/4 of a mile long, 300 feet wide, according to Jesse Marcel, loaded with this metallic debris. Mac Brazel describes it, the debris being thick enough the sheep won't cross it. He's got to drive it around him. There's clearly a lot of debris. Bill Brazel talks about a gouge down through the center, 500 feet long, 10 feet at its widest. We don't pretend to understand the mechanism of the shedding of this massive amount of debris in one area and the craft impacting much closer to Roswell. It's a much smaller craft, 15 to 20 feet wide, maybe 25 feet long, more or less intact. There seems to be some sort of damage to it, and there was some debris scattered on the impact site itself. But I don't begin to understand the mechanism for the shedding of that much debris in one area and the craft being more or less intact in the other area, unless there's some kind of an outer shell that it shed, or this was some kind of an escape capsule and the entire craft disintegrated, and this is how they attempted to get out. We just do not understand that, and we have to speculate about it.
Something crashed into the desert outside Roswell in 1947, and the ham-fisted fashion in which the U.S. Air Force handled the incident convinced a great many people that it was a flying saucer, and that at least one alien creature was recovered from the crash site. It is precisely the mixture of religion, science, superstition and folklore, intelligence and ignorance that has produced among Americans an entire subculture of belief in extraterrestrial life.
It has gotten old. Like anything else, it has become a job, a task, no longer an exciting experience. My name is Walter G. The G stands for George Haut. H-A-U-T. You ought to remember Haut. I'm not the only one. There are other people that have been involved in this that are in the same position. We're not paid a penny for anything. The only reason we're doing this is to try and get as much of the truth out as we can while some of us are still alive. You got to look at the age group that was out at the base at that time. So many of the people that have been doing the legwork, so to speak, were in their 20s. I was one of them. At the base, I was a crew member, navigator bombardier. That was my primary duty assignment. My secondary was as public relations officer for Roswell Army Airfield and the 509th Bomb Group.
The 509th Bomb Group, incidentally, was a very elite group. It was the only atomic bomb group in the world at the time.
The 509th Bomb Group was originally organized during World War II. Their mission was to drop the atomic bombs on Japan.
We also dropped the bomb on Bikini. The organization was pretty much of a tight-lipped organization.
By the time you get to Roswell in 1947, it's the only atomic strike force in the world. They're training people to begin other atomic bombing groups in the Air Force. If you became the commander of the 509th Bomb Group, you inevitably were promoted out of the job and became a general. It was the premier group in the Air Force in 1947.
Today's edition presents a roundup of the latest developments in the finding of a flying disc.
I was called to headquarters, was given copies of a press release which stated in essence that we had in our possession a flying disc.
The Army may be getting to the bottom of all this talk about the so-called flying saucer. As a matter of fact, the 509th Atomic Bomb Group headquarters at Roswell, New Mexico, reports that it has received one of the discs which landed on a ranch outside Roswell.
From what we know, it was shown to William Blanchard in the morning. About 12 o'clock at noon, a press release was issued by Blanchard. My father is a 30-year retired Air Force colonel, a World War II fighter ace, and he knew and worked with William Blanchard in the early 1960s. And according to my father, Blanchard was no fool. Blanchard was not the kind of man to put out a press release about something so dramatic as a crashed UFO without being absolutely certain he was correct. In other words, if Blanchard said there was a crashed disc, there was a crashed disc.
Colonel William Blanchard of the Roswell Air Base refuses to give details of what the flying disc looks like.
The media here was localized media. You had a radio station of 250 watts. If you were outside of town, you basically didn't get it. You had a second radio station of equal size. You had 2 newspapers. You could control the media very carefully. It strikes me as odd in today's environment to hear a radio station owner tell me that the FCC would call and say, if you broadcast a story, you will lose your license. And they don't tell the FCC to go play with themselves and broadcast the story anyway. They suppressed the story, and they were able to suppress the story. They were able to do what they needed to do to suppress it. This was a military town in 1947.
The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.
We have the military moving in, cleaning all of that material up. Walter Haut issues his press release saying we've got a flying saucer.
I was told to hand deliver to the 4 news media we had in town at that time. We had 2 radio stations and 2 newspapers. After I had lunch, I went back out to the base. First phone call that I got when I got back to the office was a fellow from London, England. His interest was, why did we put out the press release in the manner we did? And how did Major Marcel know how to fly this object? I had to explain to him that the press release was put out on the orders of the base commander, number 1. And number 2, Major Marcel did not fly this object. He took this material and put it on an aeroplane, and the aeroplane was flown forward. The phone rang and rang and rang and rang until I would guess somewhere around 4:30, as I got home somewhere around 5 o'clock. That was the end of it. The next morning, when I went out and picked up the newspaper, it said that headline that General Ramey emptied our saucer. The story was done.
Ramey says that so far as can be determined, no one saw the object in the air, and he describes it as being made of some sort of tinfoil.
That was aluminum foil, or a foil of some kind. It is not the material, just so that the material that he brought into Ramey's office is not what he was photographed with. That was more of the cover-up. I believe he said, I didn't want to be a liar about this, but when I was told this is what you're going to do, when the general tells you, you did it. Simple.
Jesse Marcel, in fact, told a number of people that it was a weather balloon. When he was shown the picture in the book, he said, that's not the stuff I brought home.
You know, when he came back from Carswell, after flying the debris, he did tell me not to talk about this, told my mother not to talk about this. This is a non-event. Play like it never happened. Don't even talk about this with your friends, which I didn't. And years later, he confided that he was actually part of the cover-up because he went along with the Air Force explanation, even though he knew full well that that was not true.
What do you think about the weather balloon story?
I think it's been a lie from the beginning. But they have to cover up some way. There was no weather balloon. My dad would not have gotten excited over a weather balloon. He was not easily excitable. And this is the most thrilled I'd ever seen him in my life. He thought that was the most fantastic thing in the world. Roswell was a brainwashed town. When the government said, It was not a flying saucer. There were no space people here. It was a weather balloon. The people in Roswell said, okay, it's a weather balloon.
Roswell seems to be the first event like this because they were simply not prepared. So we've got a lot of interest in this area. The lid is slowly being shut down. And it's absolutely brilliant what they did. They announced they have a flying saucer, but they've already captured it. They've already got it. There's nothing to see, so nobody goes out looking for the thing. Then they shift everything to Fort Worth. The higher headquarters says, no, those guys made a mistake. It was just a weather balloon. The press can't find Jesse Marcel because he's in Fort Worth and he's been silenced. They can't find Mac Brazel because he's held at the guest house here at the base. All the people they can find, General Ramey. General Ramey is saying it's a weather balloon. Colonel Blanchard suddenly goes on leave on Tuesday. So you can't get a hold of anybody. Blanchard's gone, Marcel's gone, the rancher's gone. All you can get are official spokesmen saying, yeah, it's a weather balloon. Press has got nowhere to go. The story dies at that point. Nothing to go on. And everybody forgets about it until Jesse Marcel says, I picked up pieces of a flying saucer.
So other than those people that had any immediate access to the material and handled it or saw it, the story was over. We had made a mistake.
Fear will do a lot of things. And that was fear. In 1947, it was much easier to intimidate a child than it is in today's world. We were not exposed to things like TV. We didn't have a TV in 1947. And it was just, we were a very patriotic town. If we were told you don't do something for government safety, the safety of your country, we didn't do it. I'm not sure what the time span was, maybe 3 days, maybe 4. Could have been less, it could have been more. That I was at home and a car came driving up the driveway, and we had a pretty long driveway. It was a military car. And Mother and I walked to the door. They knocked on the door, and I answered the door, and Mother was beside me, and he told Mother who he was and that he wanted to talk to the girl that had been down at the fire station. And so she told him it was me. So he came in. And we started to sit down in the living room, and he said, no, I want you go in there in the dining room. You could see the dining room from the living room there. He told Mother to sit at the end of the table, and he told me to sit at the side. He positioned himself across the table, and he told us to sit down, and he stood. And he said, I understand you were at the fire station the other day. And I told him, yes, I was. And he started out by saying, I want you to understand that you were never there. And I didn't understand what he meant, because this was kind of not a way of talking that we were accustomed to. And I said, yes, I was there. And he said, no, you weren't. And I said, yeah, I was there. And he had mentioned at first that he wanted to see the one who had seen the piece of material that they had been handling down at the station. And I said, yes, I did handle it. And he started emphasizing, no, you didn't. Well, my mother was pretty strict, and we didn't lie. So I'm insistent that, yes, I saw it, yes, I held it. And he got mad, and the more I insisted I had seen it, he didn't just come out and say, this is not something you're going to be allowed to talk about. He was trying to get it through my head that I never saw it. And he got louder, and he had one of those looks like a small baseball bat that hooks on the side of your belt, and he took that out, and he's holding it, and he starts beating his hand. Every time he said something, he would hit that on his hand, and he would say, I want you to understand, you were never there. You did not see anything. You did not hear a conversation. And he said, if you can't understand this, there are things that we can do. He asked Mother, he said, can she keep a secret? And Mother said, yes. She said, just tell her what you want her to do. And he said, well, first of all, you've got to understand that if you ever talk about this the rest of your life, he said, there are things that we can do, and we'll do them now. We can take all of you kids. We will take you either to Orchard Park or to Artesia. Orchard Park was the German POW camp during World War II, and Artesia was the Japanese POW camp. And he said, but we don't have to do that. We don't even have to let you live. He said, we'd put you in one, we'd put your parents in the other one, but we don't have to do that. He said, we can take you out here in the middle of this desert. He said, no one will ever find your bodies, ever. No one will ever know what happened to you. And so he said, the only way I'm going to let you stay around or live is if you promise you'll never talk about this the rest of your life. So I told him I wouldn't. But that really was pretty much all that was involved. He was probably there at the house maybe 45 minutes to an hour. Mother sent me into the bedroom, and I don't know what he had to say to her afterwards. One of the other military police that was with him stayed in the backyard with the younger kids so they didn't come in the house while he was there. And I never discussed it again until recently. And I'm sorry, I just... Someday I will get over it, and I haven't yet.
Your mother must have had a hard time explaining to you. Obviously, you were raised to be honest.
She never talked to us about it, never. It was never mentioned again.
From the time you came walking out of your bedroom?
From the time I went to the bedroom until the day she died, we never mentioned it. There was no conversation.
What about your father?
I never talked to him about it either. I'm sure they must have talked to him down at the station.
You must have gotten a good talking to.
I imagine he did. Excuse me just a moment.
That's okay. That's okay. Frankie, you want a drink or something?
No, I just wish this whole thing would go away. It doesn't go away. And it doesn't get any easier, because every time that I tell somebody about it, I feel like I'm 12 years old again. I can see the guy standing there with his sunglasses on, and he never took his hat off, and he never took his sunglasses off, beating his hand with that stick and threatening us. And at the time he did it, it was okay. Because we'd been through the war, we understood, and I didn't realize it was intimidation. I had no idea what it was until probably the last 5 years, actually. Because I never talked about it again. I never mentioned it to anybody. When this all came out and my kids found out about it, they were really upset with me.
Why?
Because I never told them about it. I have a husband who was very upset with me about it, too, because I never told him about it.
What was it that made you finally talk?
Kevin Randall.
If we had Frankie Rowe's story stand alone, I would be bothered by it. A 12-year-old girl who meets with military officers can certainly misconstrue what they're trying to tell her, especially the way that they arrived at her house. We know the event took place because her sister corroborates it. Her sister corroborates her father's involvement. We have affidavits on that. So, yeah, I believe Frankie Rowe's story. I think that they did visit her, and they did suggest the things she says they suggest. And I believe that because we know that others were intimidated in similar fashions. We have the military people telling us they were sworn to secrecy. All of this going on around it. So Frankie Rowe is not standalone. There's corroborative testimony that suggests somebody was putting pressure on people to silence them, and they used what means were necessary to keep those people silent. With the military people, it was merely the threat of imprisonment and going to jail because they understood that. With some of the civilians, they were told that if you ever talk about it, you will be killed. One of the people I forgot, Sheriff Wilcox, his family was told the same thing, that if he talked about it, not only would he be killed, his wife would be killed, and his daughters would be killed. The whole family would be wiped out. That comes from Sheriff Wilcox's granddaughter, Barbara Duggar, who heard the story from her grandmother. So we have a wide range of testimonies from various individuals telling us of the pressures that were placed on them to keep them silent. And I think they used a technique that was best for that specific group of individuals.
The material that was found out on the debris field was secondary to the crash of the actual object on the night of the 4th of July. I have heard secondhand that there were alien bodies.
My mother had a friend. I told you she and I never talked about it again. She had a lady that would come out and visit with her occasionally, and this woman's husband was working out at the base. He was a painter, contracting to the government, and he was painting in the base hospital the day they brought them in, and he saw the one walking in. And I heard Mother and Eula talking about Herbert seeing the one that walked in, and that they brought others in on stretchers. And Mother said to Eula May, "Did Herbert tell you what the face looks like? Because Dan said it looked like the child of the earth." And Eula May said, "That's what Herbert said." And of course they put them in this side room, but a bunch of guys are not going to just stand there, you know. They're going to peek if they possibly can, and they looked. And I'm sure that probably Mother and Eula May and maybe Daddy and Herbert, and maybe there was more discussion than I know about, but not in my presence. It's the only reference I ever heard her make about that. But I think that was done before they came out to the house. Because after they came out to the house, I never heard another comment.
The U.S. Air Force is about to tell us what it says happened. We're going over to the Pentagon now, where Colonel John Haynes of the U.S. Air Force will tell us.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
For some bizarre reason, the Air Force, which whenever you queried it about UFOs, said we have no interest in UFOs. If you feel threatened by them, contact the local law enforcement, decided they were going to reinvestigate the Roswell case.
The conclusion of the first report left no doubt that what was recovered near Roswell, New Mexico in July 1947 was debris from a formerly top-secret Army Air Forces research project, codenamed Mogul.
In 1947, they told us it was a balloon with a Ray 1 target attached to it. They then looked at their documentation and said, well, we told a little white lie in 1947. Instead of just being a normal meteorological balloon, it was part of the array train for what was then classified, the classified project, Project Mogul.
Mogul was an attempt to acoustically detect Soviet nuclear blast and ballistic missile launches.
The Air Force said that explains it. It's a highly classified project. The people at Roswell wouldn't have recognized the balloon. That's why it was covered up. We didn't want the people to get back to Project Mogul. Where this falls down is they have no documentation to prove what was picked up at Roswell was a Project Mogul balloon. The people at Roswell, Jesse Marcel, for example, the air intelligence officer, was part of Operations Crossroads, and we're told that the Ray 1 targets and the meteorological balloons were used as part of the atomic testing, so he should have been familiar with the balloons. So you've got a situation where they're saying these guys with their fingers on the triggers, if you will, can't identify a balloon and are so hysterically possessed that they claim it's a flying saucer. They didn't review the tapes of Louis Rickett, the counterintelligence NCOIC at the base, who saw the debris and commented on it. They didn't review the tapes of Major Edwin Easley, who told me that he couldn't talk about it because it was still classified 47 years later. Told me a number of times in our first conversation, I can't talk about it. I was sworn to secrecy. They didn't even talk to Brigadier General Arthur Exon, who reported that he flew over the two distinct sites, and reports the gouge. A balloon will not leave a gouge. So they didn't talk to the people I would think were key people. Instead, they talked to the people that are going to lead them directly to the Project Mogul explanation and let it go at that. They say this was a top-secret project, implying there was special equipment. It's a neoprene balloon and Raywind targets. Raywind targets had been used for 20 years. At first, they were used because they reflected the sun and they could track them visually much easier. Now they were adapted to radar use. Irving Newton said that he launched literally hundreds of them during the invasion of Okinawa. There's nothing special about these balloons, nothing at all. And by placing it with Project Mogul, we're implying that there was something unusual about these balloons, that there was something that would keep these people from identifying, but there wasn't.
This is in reference to Charles Moore, who was the project engineer on Mogul. With respect to the neoprene rubber used on those meteorological balloons, and they were standard meteorological balloons, the idea that the Mogul array was something special or out of the ordinary is an illusion. But Moore explained to me the type of rubber, how thin it was. He actually compared it to a giant condom. He said it was very thin, and that's what it looked like. And my response to that was, well, if that's the type of material that this resembled, it certainly isn't anything that would have fooled any members of the United States Armed Forces. Therefore, this was not a Mogul balloon.
I don't know that the Air Force has ever explained what took them so long to say this is the explanation, if this is the explanation. When I sent the first request to the Secretary of Defense for a response about the Roswell incident in view of the fact that there were these accusations, essentially of a government cover-up, the response I got was a very terse letter that said in about a sentence or two from the Air Force, we referred your letter to the National Archives, and that's all it said. The National Archives then said, we don't have any information about the Roswell incident, which I was convinced the Defense Department had to know before they were sending me there. So in other words, I thought I was getting the runaround. They believe that the records, in fact, were destroyed more than 4 decades ago. So there's not an individual on the job now we can just call up and say, what happened to these records? And so the GAO has simply no further recommendations or ideas on how to go farther.
The only records we're talking about being destroyed are communications from Roswell Army Airfield, 509th, only atomic bombing group in the world, out moving messages. How about the analysis of the materials? How about the autopsy reports? How about the eyewitness testimony from those who stood guard, those who carried it, those who tested at various government labs? There ought to be a ton of other paper.
What happened to this? What happened to the one that was alive?
I'm positive that there's information being withheld from the public domain concerning the Roswell event.
There are a lot of things that our government hides. And it isn't right. They shouldn't. They especially shouldn't do it to a town like Roswell that was so supportive of every single thing that they did.
The story is going to end one of these days because there's nobody going to be able to refute it or say anything about it.